Welcome, everybody. My name is Allison Harmon. I'm the counseling director at Carroll, and I feel very privileged to be on this panel tonight with Alex Hirshberg, who is our consulting psychologist at Carroll, and gave a similar talk last year that was very popular. So, back by popular demand, we thought it might be helpful to do a part two of a similar topic. I'm also joined by Stacy Daniels, our assistant head of school, and helping us behind the scenes, Amy Dempster, our marketing and communications director. So thank you all for being on the panel. Our topic tonight is building resilience for children with dyslexia. And last year, I think Alex really guided us through some great concepts on what this means. And we thought it may be helpful to continue that discussion tonight, but to think a little more specifically about how we think about helping our kids develop resilience in the context of social relationships and interpersonal skills and problem-solving skills, and trying to build our toolboxes about what it may actually look like and what we can do as parents and on our end as faculty to be helping our kids along this journey. So we will be here for about 45 minutes. We will try and leave some room for Q&A. We will be using the Q&A feature. So a few families submitted questions ahead of time, which was great. We will answer those. And if you have questions as we are moving along, please feel free to pop them in the Q&A. And then if we don't work them in the context of the slides, we will certainly take a look at that when we get to our Q&A at the end. So I think, Alex, I will hand it off to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison, and good evening, everyone. I'm really feel very honored and privileged to be a part of the Carroll community and to be able to speak with you all this evening for the second year. And we're going to be talking about this idea of resilience, right? And applying how we support our children in building resilience in the interpersonal realm. And the line, sort of the mission here that I want us to hold, right, is that as parents, our mission, our goal is to prepare our child for the road of life, as opposed to trying our best, often, without success because we're not in that much control around preparing the road for the child, right? So the fact is that this road of life is difficult, right? And there are certain skill sets that we need to build in order to navigate it. And that much of the time, this road, this journey can't be curated, right? We have to be able to navigate the bumps, the hills, the valleys, all along the way. So our agenda for this evening is, first, I just want to do a review. Maybe some of you who watched this last year will be like, no, this is some old material. But I want to ground us in, why this focus on resilience, right? And thinking about our mission as a parent in building resilient children. Then we're going to go into 3 different interpersonal communication skills that are really essential. And for each of those skills, we're going to review, like, what is this skill? Then we're going to talk about what are some of the common stressors that tend to require this skill set, and how might you hear about it as a parent? So like your child comes home from school and there's certain things that tend to come out of our kids' mouths, and and when you hear that, what I want you to think about as a parent is, wow, this is an opportunity for some skill building, right? And using, going off of that, building off of that, we're then going to review, for each of these skills, how can parents support this skill building, right? So what are the things that you can do? How can you support your child in navigating this bump in the road, right? And as we go along, one of the great things about having Allison here as the director of counseling is she's going to jump in and say, and here's how Carroll attempts to do this skill building, right? Because we all recognize that we can't just expect our kids to be able to ride these bumps on their own. We've got to give them the tools, and school plays an important role in building those capacities. So Allison will be jumping in to talk about the sort of the Carroll way and how we go about doing that. And then I'm hoping we have time for it, but I just I'm gonna want to spend like just a couple of minutes talking about social media and all that really exposes some of the interpersonal skill challenges that all kids have, right? And why it's so challenging for adolescents, especially because that's usually when we're getting on social media to navigate this new digital world. So the reason why resilience is so important is because distress is normal. So, as I was thinking about doing this training today, I was just thinking about some of the frustrations that I've experienced just in sort of the last, few weeks, right? I mean, and I know this is going to sound like a small problem, but I don't know if any of you are baseball fans, but I had to, after the Red Sox won the first game of their playoff series, I had to deal with the frustration of them losing back-to-back games and having their season be over, right? I woke up and I was supposed to give a training all the way up in New Hampshire at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I had left really, really early, and I was right on time until there was an accident, and then I ended up being 10 minutes late outside of my control, right? These are the frustrations of life, and I know these are small ones, and some of us face small ones, some of us face big ones, but we all face stress, right? And building resilience to stress does not come on its own, right? It takes practice. It takes exposure to those feelings to learn what it feels like, to understand what you have to do about it, to learn strategies to think differently to manage it, right? And so this is part of the experiential learning of life, right? And of course, children, because they've had less experience, right? Now, my teenage kids tell me all the time that they know everything there is to know about the world. So my kids know everything. They've all had the experience, but most kids do not have the same level of experience, and so they're more likely to experience novelty, right? They're less prepared to manage failure and disappointment. All parts of life, and we also know that for our students with dyslexia and language-based learning disabilities, the academic space has maybe had more than its fair share of challenge and stress and frustration, right? A harder job, more bumps in the road to navigate and learn how to overcome. So, despite how much we as parents want to be able to take those challenges away, to smooth out every pothole in the road of life, the fact is that we can't. That's one of the challenges about being a parent is feeling our child's feelings and yet actually not being in control to do all that much about it. There was a famous psychologist who said, parents believe that they are the directors of their child's life, but truly at best we get a small producer credit, right? We're mostly just theater goers watching and watching the show as it goes along. So we know that stress is normal, and we also know from our lives that social stress is normal, right? We're seeing all sorts of examples in life all the time about how human beings can be unkind, right? How hurtful things can be said, um, how people can be mean-spirited. There are times in all of our lives, I would imagine, that we have felt misunderstood, underappreciated, undervalued by others. And we also know that conflict, that disagreement, that strife is a normal part of life, right? These are unavoidable things. And as adults, we've gone through this experience of having these things. And so some of us, through that, have learned some strategies to deal with it. And children, because they have less life experience, right, are still learning how to cope and manage those feelings, right? And so our job as parents, in my opinion, is we help them learn how to tolerate those feelings because these feelings are inevitable. And the better they get at managing them and accepting that they're a part of life, the easier they become, right? And that's what resilience is. Because in all ways of the human body, in all of these ways, the way that we get stronger, the way that we become more resilient is through stress, right? And so I'm just going to quickly go over just a couple examples. If I want bigger muscles, I'm going to lift weights. And when I lift those weights, that creates small muscle tears, right? And that's the soreness that we feel, right? Is there's these little muscle tears. And when that happens, our body gets this message, which is make your muscle fibers stronger, right? So that you can lift this weight again without those muscle tears. So through the stress on the muscles, through that pain, that soreness, that's how we get stronger. Our immune system is the exact same way. You know, there is a really good reason why infants are generally gross human beings, right? There's a reason why infants are always sticking their fingers in their mouths, right? Dirt to mouth, this to mouth, everything to mouth. And the reason is because by exposing our bodies to these foreign pathogens, we are building immunity, right? Through exposure, we build resilience. So this is an unavoidable part of life. And the same thing happens with our central nervous system, right? The same thing happens with emotional resilience. We need to feel it. And so when our children do feel it, that is an opportunity for skill building, right? It's an opportunity. So, with that said, we're going to jump into some of the skills that we need to build and essentially some of the opportunities that we have as parents to support our children in building these skills. These three do not encompass every single interpersonal skill. I selected a few of them that I think are particularly relevant for school and for navigating social conflict. And also we have 45 minutes for this session, so we could go on. So I'm selecting some of them. I know that I might be missing some ones that might be particularly relevant for your child, or just things that pop to mind of as being very important for interpersonal relationships. But I want to underscore my point here about resilience by focusing on self-advocacy, perspective taking, and tolerance. So let's jump in. So what does it mean to self-advocate, right? Self-advocacy involves the ability to use communication, whether that be verbal or nonverbal, whether that be, in person or through email, some way of seeking out help, right? Um, how do I recognize my need and feel comfortable enough and have the right language and to find the right person to garner support, right? Incredibly important. Many of our kids end up feeling lost because, for a variety of reasons, either don't want to, are anxious about seeking help, or don't have the right language or don't know how to go about seeking help in an effective way. Self-advocacy also involves limit setting, right? The ability to say, I don't feel comfortable with that, right? I don't like the way that you're treating me. I don't want to play with you when you do that, right? Limit setting. Another piece is eliciting peer support, right? Which is part of help-seeking behavior, but it's a little bit different in that, it's the idea of being able to seek out and find other peers or other children your age that do meet your needs, right? So it comes almost down to like peer choices, and knowing how to get that support. So some of the stressors, right, that might come to you as a parent, right? You're sitting with your child and they are feeling lost in a class, right? They're falling behind, they're not understanding the concepts. They're struggling to maybe complete an assignment, right? They're not sure, they're sitting with their homework, they're not sure how to do it. Um, that's an opportunity for skill building. Then sometimes you might hear as a parent, it's very distressing to hear this, right? That whether it be a peer, another child, or even an adult, a teacher, right? Who in the child's perspective, right, is not treating them fairly, right? Or is being unkind to them in some way. Again, it makes sense as parents that our children who feel safe with us are going to come and share those big feelings. And both of these are opportunities for them to skill build, right? They are going to pull on you, right, to take away those negative feelings that they're having, right? Because they're in distress, and of course they're going to come to their parents seeking that relief. And so, and what I'm sort of recommending is that we, I'm sorry, we validate those feelings, but we encourage them to figure out how they're going to manage it within the structures of school. Okay. Now, I want to make a quick note because when another child is being unkind to your child, it's only natural to be concerned um, about possible bullying, right? And so bullying is this term that has become used in a variety of contexts, right? In many ways, it's almost like this legal term, but it's become more generalized in our vernacular. And I just want to differentiate for a bit bullying versus normative, what I'm calling normative social conflict, right? So bullying is a pattern of targeted behavior, right? And it's very clear with bullying that it is intended to cause harm or distress, right? And there's often a power imbalance in some way, right? And the child, the victim of the bullying, has limited ability to defend themselves, right? Now, I want to distinguish that from what I will refer to as normative social conflict. And normative social conflict can involve a lot of unkind words, right? Kids are developing their capacity to navigate um, their own self-esteem, their own feelings, right? Their executive functioning skills are developing. And so we're all vulnerable to using unkind words, to saying things that are, that can leave a real mark, right? And part of normative social conflict is that these things tend to come up in the context of disagreements or social dynamics where we want to fit in, and there are times where, in an effort to fit in, we might exclude someone else, right? Now, normative social conflict can cause harm, right? It can be hurtful, and I'm sure that we can all think back in our lives about some of the deep hurt that we felt when we felt excluded or been at at the receiving end of some unkind words. But what I would argue is that within the context of normative social conflict, that dealing with those feelings, receiving those unkind words, is still an opportunity for learning, right? It's an opportunity because these things are normative. They're a part of life. Now, when we think about Carroll specifically, right, and our students with language-based learning disorders, there's a few different dynamics here that we want to be thinking about as parents when we hear our children come home with this, someone has been unkind to me, someone has said hurtful words to me. The first is, and this comes up later in our discussion of tolerance as an interpersonal skill, which is that many of our students have cognitive profiles that include relative weakness in inhibition, right? And inhibition is the ability to sort of consider the consequences before you act, right? It's our ability to put the brakes on our actions. And so your child may be with other children, or your child themselves may be a child who is vulnerable to saying things, some of which may be unkind, without that filter, right? And so that's a part of what could lead to unkind words, even if that really wasn't the intention. The intention wasn't to harm, or that the child may have really strong positive feelings towards the other child, but something just came out, right? It just came out. We also, some of our students may be vulnerable to lower self-esteem, right? And lower self-esteem can sometimes drive unkind words, right? It's how we grapple with that self-esteem. How we help push ourselves up can unfortunately sometimes lead some children to put others down. But also when we have low self-esteem, that sometimes leads us to misinterpret others' comments as being negatively directed towards ourselves, right? So, if we believe that um, we're not, we're not smart or something, and someone corrects us in some way, it's easier for us to think, oh, they're calling me stupid, right? Um, and so these are just some of the skill challenges that our students may be facing that might make us more vulnerable um, to being a recipient of unkind words, to maybe using some unkind words, or to misinterpreting comments that weren't intended to be unkind, right? But taking them as such. And so as parents, one of the challenges we have is that we're receiving the big emotions from our child, right? Um, but but we aren't always getting the entire picture. And so that's again this opportunity for skill building. So some concrete things that we can do as parents to support self-advocacy in our children. One would be working with them on like an email template, or utilizing almost a graphic organizer for our children to have, to more quickly develop an email that can be used to reach out to teachers, right? And that would be instead of us as parents emailing the teacher to say, my child didn't understand this, or this came up. So it's teaching and reinforcing self-advocacy. Another thing that you could do is role play with your child what they could say back to a peer, or how they could navigate a peer conflict that would not add to the conflict and further escalate things, right? But try to manage it in some way, right? Another thing that you could work with your child on doing is to brainstorm who is a person in school who you can go to, right? And this is really important. Knowing your resources is a very important interpersonal skill that really helps out in all aspects of life, right? If there's a conflict in the workplace, well, you have to be able to go and advocate to human resources for support, right? So there's usually resources to help, but you have to know where to go and how to ask. Another thing that we can do is simply normalize conflict, right? Um, that it's natural for there to be anxiety around conflict, and it's natural for people to jump to conclusions. They hate me, or this is never going to end, and things like that. But one of the things that's nice about normalizing conflict, right, and saying, yeah, sometimes we don't get along, is that we can also provide opportunities for a child to see that conflict doesn't last forever, right? And then finally, another thing that we can do is, instead of focusing in on let's say the child who's been using the unkind words, we can help our child to say, who are some trusted peers that you feel like can support you? Right? Because one of the things that often makes these unkind words go away is when other children that I'm referring to as bystanders, right, can feel confident enough to say, I don't like when you treat my friend like that, right? I want you to stop. And then that creates some positive peer pressure. Allison, I want to turn it over to you for a couple of minutes. How does Carroll support building self-advocacy skills?
Yeah, and I really appreciated a lot of the points that you made. Um, we definitely try, starting in the lower grades and going right up through middle school and upper school, embed some of the skill building just through our SEL, our social emotional learning. In the lower school, we introduce, really almost starting in second and third grade, the zones of regulation. And that's a curriculum that really gives kids sort of that language and that emotional vocabulary to identify, what's going on, how am I feeling, how is my brain feeling, how is my body feeling, what is expected of me in different environments, what's expected of me in the classroom versus recess versus a social interaction, and then starting to develop that strategy toolbox and what will work with me if how I'm feeling is not a match for the environment or what's being expected, then how can I use a strategy to sort of make that shift? Knowing that different things sort of work for different kids, and we're always sort of individualizing at Carroll. So really thinking about helping kids work on identifying how they're feeling, and also how to like look at situations and things like the size of the problem, where we help kids kind of differentiate what's a small, a medium, and a big problem versus what can I do independently, what do I need a little help with, and sometimes when kids come to us for help, I think we try and it's so tempting. I mean, I have a 17 and 20-year-old, they sort of tower over me now. But I know as a parent, I've had that tendency when they're struggling, I want to sort of like jump in and solve it, solve the problem for them. And then I'm kind of like, oops, now I'm like over functioning. But in doing so, then I'm sort of accidentally like taking away opportunities for them to develop those skills. So I think we try and keep that in mind, as counselors, as advisors, as classroom teachers, as coaches, that we can be sounding boards for kids, and we can validate their feelings and experiences. We can help them understand what is it that they're feeling, or we need to kind of deconstruct, all right, what's going on here? What's your perspective? What do you think is how this other person is feeling? What do you think you want to do about that? I can help you think about the pros and cons. Do you want to go out and try that yourself? Sometimes kids will ask for our support in mediating or facilitating, but a lot of times kids just want to sort of talk it out, and then they may go try something on their own and let us know how it went. So I think whenever we can take that role as supporting and coaching, but not taking over, I think that can be a helpful stance at school. I'll also say that we do some formal education as part of our anti-bullying curriculum, where we help kids understand what are the differences that, like as Alex described, the differences between bullying or harassment and more normative social conflict. And so that kids can sort of understand and assess that as well, and how they can get support either way. I think one thing that, well, we always sort of share of this research with kids when we're doing this anti-bullying lesson, where the research kind of shows, we ask the kids, what do you think, kids were interviewed, what do you think they said were the most helpful interventions in bullying situations? Was it when adults helped? Was it when, someone who was engaging in some bullying behavior got in trouble? Was it other things? And actually, most kids say it was when another peer supported them. So I think that leveraging peer support was so effective, and that seemed to be what mattered the most to kids. And that can happen in really, it doesn't need to be the grandstand big gesture. It can just be the, hey, don't worry about it. That person was being a jerk. Let's come over here and do this. Like, or just the, like, want to go, how are you doing? You want to come play over here. It can be really small gestures that have a big impact, but I think leveraging, as you, wrote down, Alex, that bystander support. So those are sort of some of the things that we, that we use to do some of that skill building along the way.
Awesome. Thanks, Allison. So let me jump into the next skill, which is perspective taking. So, I think that one question that we need to answer when we're trying to engage in perspective taking is, why did a specific behavior happen, right? What is our explanation? How do we make the connection between what's going on in the environment and what that person did and what their motivation is? And one of the ways that we can think about, like, what skill level does my child have in perspective taking, is their ability to brainstorm multiple explanations, right? So one example would be, I'll give sort of actually a couple examples. One sort of elementary example, which would be someone cuts in front of you to go on the slide, right? And so what could be 3 different reasons why that happened, right? One reason would be that the other child wanted to harm you, right? They did it on purpose. They were trying to make me mad. Something like that, right? Of course, another way of thinking about it is that it was an accident, that it was unintentional, right? And yet a third way of doing it is, this friend really struggles with sharing. That's a skill that they're still working on. And so that led them to make this mistake, right? They weren't trying to harm you. This is something that they're working on. And oftentimes when we get ourselves into trouble with perspective taking is when we rigidly hold on to one way. It has to be. This is the reality of the situation. In a similar way, perspective taking involves understanding that conflict often takes place in the context of a relationship as opposed to a unidirectional action. That the ability to say, I wonder if there is something that I did that could have been a part of this conflict, right? And that can be really difficult because it requires a lot of self-awareness, right? And it also requires a level of like vulnerability to say, maybe I made a mistake too. And then a third component of perspective taking, actually Allison talked about in some of the skill building that they do at Carroll, which is being able to recognize the size of a problem, right? So sometimes things are bad, right? Or sometimes someone did mean to be unkind. It's not always the best explanation for things. Sometimes someone really wanted to cause harm. Can I cope with that, right? What is the size of that problem? Can I get through that? Am I still okay? And the answer is often, yeah, right? Life goes on. And one of the incredible things that can happen when a child has to manage that conflict is that they have this interaction like what Allison described, where they run into a friend who says, "Hey, come on, let's go hang out. Don't worry about that." And what felt so big, so insurmountable, is now nothing, right? Um, and again, that's part of childhood. And I'm going to bring this up again, but there's a psychologist who had this line that I never forget, which is that um, you know, what is real for kids, right? What is real for them isn't necessarily true, right? And so in that moment, it really is a huge problem because it feels all encompassing, and they're coming to you with those huge feelings and with that sense of um finality to it, right? This is the end. Nothing can be worse than this. And then when we let it resolve itself, when we validate and support, um it turns out that it was just one of your run-of-the-mill conflicts, right? More times than not. So the way that you will encounter this often as a parent, and this is one of the things I want you to it's in all caps because I want you to, this is sort of to tick off your spidey senses here, is things like all the time, right? Or no reason. Um, these sort of declarative all or nothing statements, right? These are your cues that here's an opportunity to work on perspective taking. So, some guidelines for parents. The first one is unbelievably important. And the way that I like to think about it, or my piece of advice is, don't ride the roller coaster with your child, right? It's important to remember that being a child involves emotional ups and downs, right? Part of being a child is black and white thinking. That's normative development, right? Um, it's the worst thing in the world. You're the most embarrassing parent there ever was, right? I hate you. I never want to talk to you again. I'm running away, right? Like these types of statements, right? Or no one likes me anymore. Um, I'll never be friends with that person, but they were your best friend yesterday. I know, but never again, right? These types of things, they're coming to you with big feelings, and it is only natural, right, to feel those feelings along with your child. And so my guidance and what I do as a parent, right, again, I have two teenagers here, so is how do I not ride that ride, right? How do I leverage my maturity as an adult to recognize that roller coaster goes up, it comes down, and then it rides back into the station smoothly, right? This is sort of the natural ebb and flow of things. And what's so important is that I maintain calm, right? That I model the appropriate size of the problem, right? That's so important as a parent and as part of your job to sort of co-regulate your child to not ride that roller coaster. Another thing that you want to do is act curious, right? There's a pull on us, and Allison talked about this in her own parenting, to sort of become the bulldog, right? Almost, right? To become the grizzly and go into protection mode. And usually that comes with sort of taking the child's what feels real to the child and assuming that what feels real is also true. And what I would suggest is that you explore with them, that you the first validate, right? I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. And gosh, yesterday you said that this person was actually your friend, and now you're saying that they're really mean. I wonder, gosh, could there be any other way to that could possibly explain why this person treated you this way, right? And the child might not be available. Your child might not be available for that in the moment. They might have to calm down first, right? You might have to wait for a more opportune time when emotions have settled a little bit. And sometimes by delaying the conversation, by just validating and trying to help them engage in a relaxing activity, when those emotions settle, they're much more open to these different explanations, right? And as kids get older, they oftentimes become better able to recognize that they were having an emotional moment when their reality reflected the emotion and not the reality, right? So so we ultimately want to have a conversation where we're helping kiddos act curious. We still want to encourage that help-seeking behavior, right? Sometimes it's helpful to go to a peer and say, "Here's how I interpreted this. How did you?" Right? Because especially a trusted peer, they might have seen something differently because they were a little bit more removed from the situation, right? And all of these pieces, what helps how what helps us all as parents hold back that inner grizzly, right? That inner protective force is to embrace that the normative, totally normative difference between what feels real to a child, right? And what is actually true. That is such an important distinction because I am not suggesting that your child is lying to you. In fact, the opposite. I think that they believe with all of their heart that they are representing an objective, realistic summary of the situation at hand, right? But we have to recognize that as perspective taking grows, right, as it continues to mature, we are still vulnerable to not being able to get to the truth, right? The objective truth of what happened, that we can have some blind spots where we miss out, misinterpret, or fail to see things that we did that brought this about, right? So those are some strategies to support perspective taking. Allison, I'm noticing the time. I don't know if you want to jump in for just a quick minute on Carol, and then we'll go to tolerance.
Yeah, sure. Um, I think that with some of those, some of those skills that Alex was talking about, we do some lessons in our health and wellness program that really get at some of those perspective taking skills directly, but in sort of a fun way. We teach kids about the worry cycle. Worry cycle is a lot of fun to learn about. But we also learn about like thinking traps, like the all or nothing thinking, or the catastrophizing, like going to the worst case scenario first and sort of planting your flag there. But being able to recognize some of those patterns that can get in the way of being able to see somebody else's perspective, and even doing some drawing activities where, I'll stand up and I will describe a drawing and each student will draw it, and then we compare the pictures, and everybody's looks a little bit different, but they all heard, just my exact words about describing it, and we kind of talk about how we can all be in that same experience, but have these different perspectives, and sort of that, like, each person's perspective is true and real, and yet there's really different facets and sides that we can benefit from if we're able to make room for that. So sort of some fun ways to play with those ideas.
Yeah, that's awesome, Allison. One thing that I do with kids when I'm working with them in therapy, and I want to talk about perspective taking as a skill, is I show them there are these images. I'm sure you've seen them where it can be more than one thing, right? So there's one that's a rabbit and a duck, basically, right? And if you look at one side of the image, you see a rabbit, and if you look at the other side of the image, you see a duck. And the idea is depending on what you're choosing to focus on, what you're seeing is totally different, right? In a similar one with it's either an older woman looking down with like this very big chin, and or this younger woman with a necklace looking off into the distance, I think it is. So it's this idea of that where we try to focus our attention makes us see the world in a different way, right? And it could be that, that you're choosing to see the old woman when, but you're failing to see the young woman. So what are we missing? What are we not seeing? And so a lot of really interesting skills. And I would imagine too that in when students are reading a book, we talk about the character's motivations and the different perspectives and things like that. So there's all sorts of opportunities to build those competencies. The last skill here is about tolerance, right? And tolerance is a combination of a couple things here. One is just emotional tolerance, right? This idea um, uh, of recognizing that because negative emotions are unavoidable, right? I have to learn how to manage those feelings. That is an inescapable part of life. And so when I have them, I kind of have to embrace them, right? They're character builders, we used to say, right? It builds character. And it does, I think. It does. It builds, I mean, one way of describing character is resilience. And it's interesting because there's these emotions that many of us as adults had to experience as children that our children have way less exposure to. And the big emotion for me that we as adults growing up had way more exposure to was boredom, right? And so I used to go on lots of road trips to visit family and things like that, right? And my parents would listen to National Public Radio in the front seat of the car, right? And I still, in my head at random moments, I'll get that song that would play at the top of the hour before they would do the news, right? It's like over and over and over again in my head. And I didn't have Netflix, of course. I didn't have a video screen of any kind. And so, I had very few options to entertain me. And other than picking a fight with my sister, which was only effective for like 15 minutes of entertainment, I just had to learn how to be bored and sit with those feelings, right? And now when I take my kids on longer road trips, I hook them up to the dopamine drip that is the phone or the screen or whatever. And so they're less exposed to those feelings. So this idea that I want to underscore is that we all have experienced negative emotions, right? And learning how to accept and manage them becomes really important, right? Part of that is accepting conflict. I mean, I'm certainly not a person who I tend to be fairly conflict avoidant in my life, and I struggle with conflict, but there are times when there's just disagreement, when some people don't think I did a good job, right? I'm hoping not, but I'm hoping, but there may be some of you who's like, I don't really like this training tonight, right? And I'm gonna have to sit with those feelings. Um, Another is being able to adapt to differences in others, right? That in any learning community, there are going to be people who think differently than us, right? Who believe things that are different than us, who come from different cultures or backgrounds, who have different personalities or different interests, and we need to be able to tolerate that, right? And then part of tolerance is being able to find the positive, being able to shift from um, from focusing on things that aren't going well to finding the good in other people, right? That's what helps us to tolerate others. And so sometimes when we're the recipient of unkindness, right? That becomes an opportunity to tolerate it, right? And so as a parent, you might hear things like, I need to move my class. I can't be with that student anymore. Or like, I won't work with that tutor, right? They don't understand me. They don't get me, right? Um, and I recognize that that's hard, right? We want to always have students who we get along with or educators that really get us, right? But there's this idea of, okay, but so how do you adapt, right? How do you adapt to that? How do you manage the fact uh, that maybe this teacher that you have doesn't have the perfect style for you, right? Um, so these are opportunities for learning, and as opposed to, well, let's just get them apart because because essentially, like, the only way that I can manage is if I have that teacher who is a perfect fit for me. So the supportive parenting component of this is we have to acknowledge reality. There's this idea of radical acceptance. We're just going to accept that sometimes things do not work out as we wish they would, right? We don't always get into class with all of our friends, right? We don't get to choose who we're with all the time. What the other thing is it's an opportunity for you as a parent to challenge the student's problem solving, right? Is separation, for example, I can't be with that student or I can't be with that teacher, does that accomplish your long-term goal, right? Like, is that really solving the problem? What happens if you have someone next year who you don't perfectly get on with, right? And instead, let's brainstorm you can engage in active problem solving to help the situation to improve, right? Because maybe it's being able to articulate the what practices have been most effective for you in learning from other teachers in the past and learning how to communicate those things, right? Maybe that involves eliciting support and being a sounding board to figure out how to best advocate for yourself. But it's about working through the problem and adjusting as opposed to seeking a way around it, right? Because in the end, it's an opportunity for learning, right? We all have to navigate conflict. We don't have the luxury of having to always being working with people who fit us or that we like. We don't always have bosses. I certainly know from experience, we don't have bosses that we always like to work for or feel like understand and value us. So these are unavoidable situations and opportunities to build tolerance. We're coming upon 8 o'clock, so I just want to go over some key takeaways. I'm going to talk about for 1 minute about social media before we get into some questions here. So the key takeaways, right? Interpersonal challenges are inevitable. They're a part of life. And one of the hardest things about being a parent is bearing witness to the emotions that come with these interpersonal challenges without having a whole lot of agency to do something about it, right? And then secondarily, my message is that the best way for our children to work through it is to experience it, right? So even though we want to figure out a way to have greater levels of agency as a parent, that might not actually be what is in the child's best long-term interest, right? Because it's taking away an opportunity for skill building. We talked about these essential skills, right? Not the laundry list, but a few for tonight. And I'm hoping that you are walking away with some concrete ideas around how you can help support your child in building these skills while also being that safe and validating environment for them to share their feelings, right? And that in order for this to happen, we and our children, us as parents and our children, are engaging in a parallel process. We're all, because we love our kids so much, we feel their discomfort along with them. And so as they are managing it, we are managing it too. And so one of the best things that we can do is model how to tolerate that discomfort, right? And lead them to understand and accept that these negative feelings, these emotions in their body that can't harm them, right? They feel bad, but they can't harm them, that they will come and they will go over time, right? And that is part of life. Um, a quick note on social media, right? Obviously, something that we didn't have to grapple with as kids is this digital world. And um, and there are unique challenges that expose these interpersonal skill, like especially lagging skills and challenges. One is that there's an anonymity to social media or a perceived anonymity that makes it more likely that unkind words will be used, right? So if we struggle in real life when we're face to face and receive that facial feedback with inhibition, it becomes more difficult when we're on social media and there's that one step removal. Um, in addition, whenever we're writing without, it lacks a lot of the context and other nonverbals that provide additional information about what a message is trying to convey. And that's important because it makes us more vulnerable to misinterpretation, right? And then, of course, within the digital world, and we're posting things and fun things are happening, and we're seeing that we weren't part of it, right? I mean, I feel lucky that I was not aware of all the parties that I was not invited to, right? But now we have this world where we're very much aware of those things. And so it's easy for children to feel left out, to feel excluded. And one of the things is that there's no manual for this, right? Where we children are navigating this world together and everyone makes mistakes. And so your child may be a recipient of some unkind words online, right? Or your child may be feeling left out and it feels purposeful, right? And one of the things that we as parents can do is model that perspective taking, model that tolerance, and model that self-advocacy to help kids navigate this and better work through it. Because again, we're all kids are working on this, and so many kids are, well, we're all really vulnerable to making mistakes in the digital space. Um, so, Allison, I don't know if you have any last words before we turn it over to questions.
I love the takeaways and the social media. I know we're all facing this together. I'll note that it was just reminded me one thing that you were saying. I was talking to an upper schooler today that I have known for a long time. And we used to talk in middle school about like practicing being uncomfortable on purpose and trying to like find ways to do that. And so he told me, he's like, I can do it now for 32 minutes, I could only do it for anyway. So it was nice to sort of hear this, like, yes, we do have to like lean into discomfort. And there's so many great ways where you can join with your kids on building that skill. It's hard. It's hard for all of us, but really thinking about all the ways that it pays off when when we can kind of manage through just all of those expected ups and downs. I think there was a question, Alex, that came through that I thought, I know we're just hitting 8 o'clock, so maybe we can take just a few minutes over 8 to read a question or two from parents, and then we can say goodnight to everybody. So this one came in, and this parent is talking about their child that is prone to low self-esteem and is really strong at perspective taking, really empathic and understanding sometimes, why peers may say hurtful things intentionally or not, but how to help her child differentiate between understanding and accepting and having that perspective, but also, not internalizing that she deserves to be treated that way. So maybe that kind of balance of what you were talking about earlier with the setting the limits and the advocating with that perspective taking.
So I think that what I'm hearing is that in one area, there's really strong perspective taking, which is giving the benefit of the doubt to others, right? But in another way, there's a bit of a challenge with perspective taking in the tendency to internalize those comments and sort of feeling like they are like an accurate statement about her, right? And so I think that there's this opportunity for work around how do I think about myself, right? How do I attend to how do I take in all the information about myself and begin to learn how to appreciate the positive things or learn about the positive about myself while also accepting any weakness that I may have, which of course is a part of life, right? I mean, we all of us have strengths and weaknesses, and when we're more vulnerable to self-esteem, we tend to focus on those areas where we don't feel like we measure up, and we put a lot of less emphasis on those areas where we may excel, or strengths or unique capacities that we have, right? So I think that one of the things is how do we broaden that perspective to incorporate those things. And one powerful there's a couple things that I will often do. One is there's this evidence-based practice called three good things. And basically it sort of asks the individual to identify either three good things that they did today, right? If we're talking about self-esteem, three accomplishments, three successes, um, or just generally three positive things if we're dealing with like low mood, right? Like, oh, nothing good happens, and that's the perspective. And that is a skill, right? Human beings tend to be much better at noticing what is not going well or what is wrong than what is going well. And so just have that as part of dinner, right? That like at dinner, just we're gonna do three good things. Three good things that you did today. And trying that out for a few weeks and seeing how that builds and building on that discussion. So that's part of the perspective taking that we can be working on.
I was also thinking about this question and thinking about Carroll's work in incorporating over the last 4 or 5 years restorative practices in education that kind of is borrowed from the restorative justice model. And it's really based on, the foundation is really based on developing strong community and culture and relationships, and then doing proactive work in this sort of circle format. Um, and then if and when situations happen, a conflict, or maybe, something happened that caused some, emotional harm to somebody, we use this same circle format to be able to help kids kind of process and move through situations. We use it among our Carroll adults as well. And then the circle is sort of already a familiar structure. And then we use these sort of same sets of questions when something happened, where we asked kids to, think about, what happened and what they were thinking and feeling at the time. What have they thought or felt since? Who was impacted and how? What may be needed to restore or repair after a conflict? And, this question made me think of that because it is this really structured, scaffolded way, I think, to have kids be able to, in a really empowering way, be able to share and say how they were impacted, and be able to have someone understand, regardless of intent, sort of maybe how they were impacted. And then I think to be able to offer sort of restorative gestures. So, I think in that balance of, we all want our kids to be really empathic. And we also want them to be able to, feel that self-worth to know that they're important and their feelings are important. So I think it's a nice structure that gives kids like an opportunity to have an experience where they get to practice those skills, but they also get that sort of relational repair that I think is so important for some of those things that parent was naming.
Absolutely. Are there any other questions that have come in?
I think there was one other question that I thought was really great, and a parent was saying that I think talking about inhibition and sometimes speaking or acting impulsively, and this parent saying that was something that they often feel is sort of their response. They can sort of struggle with that as well. So sort of how to maybe recognize and help that in their when they see that happening with their child, when that's something that they're also working on.
Yeah, so I think that inhibition is this executive functioning skill, right? It's it's not like a choice, right? Uh, and um, and we all have these moments where something comes out of our mouth that we wish hadn't, right? We want to stuff it right back in. And for some of us who have maybe more well-developed inhibition skills, those things tend to come out when we're more emotionally dysregulated, right? Because all of our executive function skills go down when we're really upset. Um, the 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 skill that we're really working on most is self-monitoring, is the ability to sort of recognize after something comes out that that was not how it was intended, right? When something comes out of our mouth, then um, we always have the ability to say, "Oops, sorry, I didn't mean that," right? And so I think that we want to model that skill, right? The ability to acknowledge when something came out that we didn't intend, right? Some part of that is building self-awareness of like, these are the things that I'm good at, but inhibition is actually something that I can struggle with from time to time, and being able to name it and own it, and accepting, tolerating the negative emotions that come with recognizing that you might have a relative weakness in an area, right? So I think that that's important. I think that there's also, as adults, when there's different executive functioning skills, we often learn how to compensate for them over time. We have more experience to figure out how to compensate. And so we have some experience on, um, how do I model what's worked for me, right? And so that can also be important.
Okay, do we have time for, there's just two quick questions that came in, and then I think we'll
Sure.
wrap it up for this evening. The first one was maybe just a little bit of a reminder, Alex, when you talked about ways that parents can respond when you hear your child say, like, that kid always does this to me, or
Okay.
yeah, so, maybe like globalizing, or sort of making overgeneralizations, I think is the
Okay,
question.
so I think that if I was to do like a step by step, right? So first is when I hear that word or that phrase, the sort of black or white thinking, um, that is a telltale sign that the child is experiencing emotional dysregulation. And when emotional dysregulation is happening, that means that reasoning is not happening, right? Like we don't think our best when we're emotionally dysregulated. So the first thing that I'm going to do is validate and give time, right? As parents, we want to problem solve, right? We want to jump in. Let's fix it, right? Let's fix it. And that's just not the moment. Because when you start to do some of the other things that I was suggesting you do, like help them brainstorm other explanations and, things like that, you're likely to get either anger because you don't understand or you don't believe me, right? Or no, 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 right? And those are more signs that we need to wait for the emotions to come down. And once the emotions have come down, right, I want to model curiosity. So instead of saying, no, they didn't mean it like that, or like trying to sort of persuade them to take a different tact, I'm aiming to ask some open-ended questions um, about, like, I want to understand, like, why do you think this child did that to you, right? Um, and, is there any other way, to understand this? Or, I think you said that that they've treated other people like this. Could this be, I don't know, is this like some challenge that they have, like that they are just really not, and try to ask questions and guide them. In the end, a child may stick to their global perspective, right? They might not be movable. In which case, I'm then saying, okay, so given that you have a child who is treating you like this and they treat it all the time, I'm then going to shift to, and so how do you problem solve? right? Who are you going to go to for support? Right? And when Allison is there, or the counselor is there, and they're going to do a restorative circle, one of the benefits of that is that kids tend to listen a little bit more to people who aren't their parents. So there might be a little bit more openness in that setting. Um, and then also, if a child is really dug in to this perspective and they're not willing to seek out help, well, this is an opportunity for learning tolerance, whether they want to or not, because we can't make this problem go away. So we can say, it sounds like you feel this way and you don't want any help with it. I'm so sorry you're feeling bad. And that's it. That's the intervention. And then life takes over. And then you get this experience where you ask them how their day was, and their day was fine, right? And nothing happened. And you have to do your best. You have to work your hardest as a parent to not say, I told you so, right? So that would be my step by step there.
That's super helpful. All right, our last question for the evening. When using these strategies and trying to be a safe space for our kids, do we match their intensity, or do we keep our tone and our voice mild? Sometimes if I try and keep my tone mild, my children think I don't care.
So I think uh that I guess you can validate using their sort of like tone or the way that they prefer. It's like, oh, if you want me to get that way, right? That's one way of doing it. As long as you are ultimately, when they're calm, modeling these like supporting them in better self-advocacy and things like that. But sometimes kids also just want to vent, right? Like sometimes all you have to do is be like, oh, that kid was so annoying, I know, right? But of course you can't do it too much, or then you're embarrassing. So you have to find that right balance. And then the other thing is you can say to them, like, you know when I'm saying it in a calm way, this is why I'm doing it as a parent, right? And sometimes, I'll just say this, sometimes there is nothing that we can say that is the right thing to say. You are just going to receive criticism for whatever because you are the safe parent, right? Part of being the safe parent means that you can be an outlet for emotions that they can't share with other people, right? And um, and uh, so I think that's really important. And one of the things that we can say to a child in that instance is there anything that I can say right now that won't make it worse? Right? Is there any if there's something that I can say that won't make it worse, let me know. But I'm trying, right? So that's all that we can do.
I love those. Those are great. Well, I really want to thank all the families who spent time with us on a Wednesday evening for this topic. And if there's any other questions that come in, we will be sure to push those out through email. And also just want to give a plug to check the website for our upcoming topics for the speaker series. I think Allison West, our middle school division head, will be up next month talking about the journey of academic growth and how it is individualized and doesn't always follow the most linear path, but it's a great journey. So tune in for that. And I really want to thank Alex for sharing all your wisdom with us. It's so great to have you as our consulting psychologist, and I love hearing you talk about these concepts and how to put them into practice. And with skill and humor. So we really appreciate that. And thank you, Stacy and Amy, for helping to set this up. And we will maybe see many of you tomorrow at Fall Festival, in the upcoming weeks. So thank you so much for joining.
Have a good evening, everyone. Thanks so much.